The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Tribunal stretched high above the courtroom floor, its walls shimmering with light from 100 different star systems. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in floating seats arranged in a perfect circle, their various forms casting strange shadows in the ethereal glow. Some looked like walking trees with golden bark, others resembled crystalline spiders the size of bears, and a few appeared to be living clouds of gas contained in transparent suits. At the center of it all sat Security Chief Nexvara, her 6 arms moving gracefully as she flipped through digital files that floated in the air before her. Her normally calm expression grew more troubled with each page she read. The other tribunal members watched her carefully, knowing that Nexvara had seen everything in her 300 years of service. Nothing usually surprised her anymore. But this case was different. This case made no sense at all. The charges seemed simple enough at first glance. A human named Kim Tae-ho stood accused of breaking 17 major galactic safety laws. These weren't small violations like forgetting to register a ship or trading without proper permits. These were serious charges that could result in permanent exile from civilized space. The problem wasn't the charges themselves. The problem was how Kim Tae-ho had supposedly broken these laws. According to the official report, he had survived, alone on Kethvar Prime for 8 full months. Not 8 hours, not 8 days. 8 months. Nexvara had personally reviewed the classified files on Kethvar Prime just that morning. The planet was officially designated as a Class 9 Deathworld, the most dangerous classification in the galactic database. The air itself was toxic to most species. The gravity was 3 times what most civilized beings could handle. The temperature swung from freezing cold to burning hot within hours. And the wildlife was the stuff of nightmares. Professional survey teams equipped with the best armor and weapons money could buy rarely lasted more than 6 hours on that cursed rock. The longest recorded survival time belonged to a team of Vraxian warriors, beings known throughout the galaxy for their incredible toughness and fighting skills. They had managed to stay alive for 18 hours before their distress beacon activated. Yet somehow this single human had not only survived for 8 months but had actually gotten healthier during his time there. The medical scans were sitting right there in front of her, and Nexvara had read them 3 times to make sure she wasn't making a mistake. Kim Tae-ho's bone density had increased by 30%. His heart was pumping blood more efficiently than when he first arrived on the planet. His brain showed new neural pathways that hadn't existed before. Most shocking of all, his body had developed immunity to toxins that could kill creatures 10 times his size. The human was sitting calmly, in the defendant's chair, looking completely relaxed despite being surrounded by some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He wore simple clothes and had an easy smile on his face, as if he was attending a friendly gathering rather than a trial that could destroy his life. Around the courtroom, alien dignitaries whispered to each other in dozens of different languages. The translator devices built into the walls worked overtime, creating a constant low hum of conversation. Everyone was asking the same question: how was this possible? The Althorian ambassador, a being that looked like a walking pile of rocks, leaned toward his neighbor and spoke in hushed tones. His people were known as some of the toughest in the galaxy, having evolved on a planet with crushing gravity and constant volcanic activity. Yet even they wouldn't dare set foot on Kethvar Prime without serious protection. The Zephyrian representative, her body shifting between solid and gas form as her emotions changed, couldn't stop staring at the human. Her species had mastered environmental adaptation centuries ago, able to survive in space without protection by changing their molecular structure. But what this human had done seemed to go beyond even their abilities. Prosecutor Velthak was preparing his opening statement at a podium made of living metal that adjusted its height and shape to accommodate his tall, thin frame. He had prosecuted thousands of cases over his long career, but never one quite like this. Usually, violations of galactic safety protocols resulted from stupidity, greed, or desperation. This case seemed to involve something else entirely. The prosecution's argument was straightforward. By surviving on Kethvar Prime, Kim Tae-ho had proven that the planet's danger classification was wrong. This meant that other beings might attempt to visit the planet without proper preparation, leading to countless deaths. His actions, regardless of his intentions, had endangered the entire galactic community. But as Nexavara looked at the calm human sitting in the defendant's chair, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were all missing something important. Something that would change everything they thought they knew about survival, adaptation, and the species they had dismissed as fragile newcomers to the galactic stage. Kim Tae-ho walked to the witness stand like he was heading to his favorite coffee shop. His movements were easy and relaxed, completely different from the nervous shuffling most defendants showed when facing the most powerful court in the galaxy. The floating platform adjusted itself to human height as he stepped onto it, and he gave a small nod of thanks to the machine as if it were a person. The seasoned judges of the tribunal had seen everything during their centuries of service. They had watched hardened criminals break down in tears, seen diplomatic masterminds weave elaborate lies, and observed trained soldiers stand at perfect attention while giving testimony. But none of them had ever seen someone look this comfortable while facing charges that could end their freedom forever. Judge Kexathera, whose crystal body had darkened to a deep purple indicating deep concern, leaned forward in her floating chair. Her voice resonated through the chamber like wind chimes in a storm as she asked Kim Tae-ho to describe his experience on Kethvar Prime. What happened next left the entire courtroom speechless. Kim Tae-ho began talking about his 8 months on the Deathworld the same way someone might describe a camping trip. His voice was steady and clear, with no trace of the trauma that should have come from surviving in hell itself. He started from the beginning, explaining how his transport ship had crashed during a routine supply run to a nearby research station. The crash had destroyed most of his equipment and killed the ship's navigation system. He found himself alone, on a planet that officially didn't exist on any civilian star charts, with nothing but basic emergency supplies and the clothes on his back. Any other being would have activated their emergency beacon and waited for rescue, hoping to survive long enough for help to arrive. But Kim Tae-ho had done something completely different. He had decided to make the planet his home. The gallery of alien representatives sat in stunned silence as he described his first week. He talked about finding a cave system that provided shelter from the acid rain that fell every few days. He explained how he had studied the local wildlife, not to avoid them, but to understand their behavior patterns. Most shocking of all, he described his first encounter with a Kethvar razor cat, a creature that hunting manuals classified as kill on sight due to its extreme aggression. Instead of running or fighting, Kim Tae-ho had observed the creature for 3 days. He noticed that it always hunted in the early morning and returned to the same resting spot each afternoon. He realized that the razor cat wasn't randomly violent, but was simply protecting its territory, so he had left offerings of food at the edge of its domain and slowly built what he called a working relationship with one of the most dangerous predators in known space. The Vraxian ambassador actually stood up from his seat at this point, his massive frame trembling with disbelief. His people were legendary warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds through pure combat skill. Yet here was this small human casually describing how he had befriended creatures that could tear apart a Vraxian battle tank. But Kim Tae-ho wasn't finished. He went on to describe how he had built his permanent shelter using bones from creatures that had died natural deaths in the area. He explained his process of testing local plants and fungi, carefully trying tiny amounts to see which ones were edible and which ones might have medicinal properties. He had even figured out how to ferment certain mushrooms into a substance that fought off infections. The most incredible part came when he described his food chain system. Kim Tae-ho had essentially created a small ecosystem around his camp. He raised harmless creatures that fed on plant matter, used their waste to fertilize gardens of edible fungi, and had even domesticated smaller predators to help him hunt larger game. When Prosecutor Velthak interrupted to accuse him of making up these impossible stories, Kim Tae-ho simply smiled and rolled up his sleeves. The scars on his arms glowed softly under the tribunal's scanning lights, each one telling a story of survival that should have been impossible. The medical scanners built into the courtroom immediately began analyzing the strange marks, and the readings appeared on screens throughout the chamber. The results sent waves of shock through the assembled aliens. The scars contained traces of toxins that were classified as Class A biological weapons. These were poisons so deadly that a single drop could kill a fully grown Vraxian battle beast within minutes. Yet Kim Tae-ho's body had not only survived exposure to these toxins, but had actually developed immunity to them. His defense attorney, a kind Altarian named Keeper Rothwin, watched in amazement as his client continued describing what he called basic survival techniques. To Kim Tae-ho, everything he had done was simply common sense. You observe your environment. You adapt to local conditions. You work with nature instead of fighting against it. But to the representatives of hundreds of advanced civilizations, his casual descriptions sounded like the achievements of a legendary hero from ancient myths. Species that had spent thousands of years developing advanced technology to survive in hostile environments were listening to a human explain how he had done the same thing, using nothing but his bare hands and his mind. The testimony continued. For hours, and with each new detail, the impossible became undeniable. This human hadn't just survived on Kethvar Prime. He had thrived there in ways that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about survival, adaptation, and the limits of biological possibility. The atmosphere in the tribunal chamber changed completely when the prosecution activated the massive holographic display system. What had been a standard courtroom suddenly transformed into something that felt more like a horror movie theater. The lights dimmed automatically as three-dimensional images of Kethvar Prime filled the space above everyone's heads. The planet looked exactly like what nightmares were made of. Dark red storms swirled across its surface, lightning crackling, between clouds that seemed to move with their own sinister purpose. The ground was a patchwork of jagged rocks, bubbling pools of acid, and forests of twisted trees that looked more like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. Prosecutor Velthak stood beside the hologram, his tall frame casting eerie shadows as he began reading the environmental data. His voice carried across the silent chamber as he listed statistics that made even the toughest aliens in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats. The atmospheric pressure on Kethvar Prime was 3.7 times what most civilized species considered normal. This meant that simply breathing the air would feel like having a heavy weight pressing down on your chest every second of every day. Most beings would pass out within minutes from the strain alone. The gravity was even worse. At 3 times galactic standard, every step would feel like walking through thick mud while wearing heavy armor. Simple tasks like lifting your arms or turning your head would become exhausting within hours. The human body, which most species considered fragile, should have been crushed flat within the first day. But the environmental hazards were nothing compared to what lived on the planet's surface. The prosecution's hologram zoomed in to show various creatures that called Kethvar Prime home, and the assembled aliens gasped audibly at what they saw. Razor cats prowled through the images, their metallic claws gleaming in the dim light. These weren't just dangerous predators, they were living weapons. Each one stood as tall as a human at the shoulder, with retractable claws that could slice through starship hull material. Their pack-hunting behavior had been studied by military tacticians as an example of perfect coordination and ruthless efficiency. Even more terrifying were the shadow stalkers, creatures that seemed to be made of living darkness. They could change their shape at will, sliding through cracks barely wide enough for a finger before expanding to their full size of 12 feet tall. The hologram showed security footage from previous expeditions, where these creatures had simply materialized inside sealed habitats and torn apart entire research teams. The most dangerous of all were the mind hunters, predators with intelligence, levels that rivaled most sentient species. They didn't just kill their prey, they studied them first. Previous expedition reports described these creatures setting elaborate traps, using psychological warfare, and even mimicking the voices of their victims to lure others into ambushes. As the holographic presentation continued, murmurs of disbelief spread through the courtroom. Several alien representatives had to excuse themselves, unable to continue watching the images of creatures that violated every natural law they understood. Then Survey Commander Hexmole took the stand, and the room fell completely silent. Commander Hexmole was a legend in exploration circles. His people, the Carathians, were born and raised in hostile environments. Their homeworld had active volcanoes, poisonous swamps, and predators that made most other planets look like peaceful gardens. If anyone could survive on a Deathworld, it should have been a Carathian expedition led by their most experienced commander. His voice was steady as he recounted his mission to Kethvar Prime, but everyone could see the haunted look in his multiple eyes. He had brought a team of 12 specialists, each one equipped with the best survival gear that galactic technology could provide. They had power armor that could withstand direct hits from military weapons, atmospheric processors that could create breathable air from almost any gas mixture, and weapons designed to stop creatures the size of small buildings. They had lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. Commander Hexmol described how his team had been systematically hunted from the moment they set foot on the planet. Creatures didn't attack randomly or out of simple hunger. They coordinated their assault like a military operation, using the planet's natural hazards as weapons and exploiting every weakness in the team's equipment and tactics. Half his crew was dead before the first hour ended. The others fell one by one as their equipment failed under conditions it was never designed to handle. Commander Hexmol himself only survived because his team's medic had sacrificed her own life to get him back to their emergency shuttle. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. A team of trained professionals with advanced technology had been completely overwhelmed in hours, while Kim Tae-ho had not only survived for months, but had actually thrived. But then came the moment that changed everything. The prosecution played security footage from Kim Tae-ho's camp that had been recorded by automated satellites orbiting the planet. The images showed something that should have been impossible. Kim Tae-ho was working alongside the same creatures that had slaughtered Commander Hexmol's team. Razor cats followed him around his camp like oversized house cats. Shadow stalkers helped him move heavy materials, their shape-changing abilities used for construction rather than killing. Most incredible of all, a pack of mind hunters seemed to be taking instructions from him. Their terrifying intelligence focused on protecting rather than destroying. The footage showed Kim Tae-ho casually walking up to creatures that official classification manuals labeled as unreasonably hostile to all life forms, and simply patting them on the head like friendly pets. He shared his food with predators that could have eaten him in a single bite. He slept peacefully while surrounded by monsters that had given seasoned warriors nightmares. The tribunal sat in stunned silence as they watched a human doing the impossible. Not just surviving in hell, but making it into something that looked almost like home. The tribunal chamber buzzed with nervous energy as Dr. Kilneth approached the witness stand. Her reputation preceded her wherever she went in the galaxy. For over 2 centuries, she had studied the evolution and biology of hundreds of different species across thousands of worlds. Governments paid enormous sums for her expertise, and her research had shaped galactic policy on colonization and species interaction. Dr. Kilneth looked nothing like the typical academic. Her crystalline body shifted colors constantly, reflecting her thoughts and emotions in patterns of light that danced across her transparent skin. Right now, those patterns showed deep confusion mixed with scientific excitement, a combination that made even the most experienced tribunal members lean forward in their seats. She had spent the past 3 weeks analyzing every piece of biological data collected from Kim Tae-ho during his time on Kethvar Prime. What she had discovered challenged everything the galactic scientific community believed about evolution, adaptation, and survival. Her voice resonated through the chamber with the authority of someone who had devoted their entire life to understanding how life worked across the universe. But today, for the first time in her long career, she sounded genuinely amazed by her own findings. Dr. Kilneth began by explaining what should have happened to Kim Tae-ho on Kethvar Prime. According to every biological model the galaxy used, his body should have shut down within hours. The atmospheric pressure should have caused his blood vessels to burst. The gravity should have crushed his bones. The toxic environment should have poisoned his organs beyond repair. Instead, his body had done something that Dr. Kilneth had never seen before in any species. It had adapted in real time, making changes to itself that normally took thousands of generations to develop through natural evolution. The holographic displays around the chamber lit up with detailed scans of Kim Tae-ho's physiology. His bone structure had become denser and stronger, but not through the slow process of calcium buildup that most species experienced. His bones had actually changed their internal structure, creating new patterns that could handle incredible stress while remaining lightweight. His cardiovascular system had undergone even more dramatic changes. His heart had developed additional chambers that helped pump blood more efficiently in high gravity. His blood vessels had grown thicker walls and developed new pathways that could reroute circulation if parts of his system were damaged. Most remarkably, his blood itself had changed, developing new proteins that could carry oxygen more effectively in the thin, toxic atmosphere of Kethvar Prime. But the changes to his nervous system were what truly amazed Dr. Kilneth. Kim Tae-ho's brain had grown new neural pathways at a rate that should have been impossible. These weren't just random connections, but organized networks that seemed designed to process information about his hostile environment more effectively. His reflexes had improved dramatically, his pattern recognition abilities had enhanced, and his stress response system had become incredibly sophisticated. The alien representatives in the gallery listened with growing amazement as Dr. Kilneth explained each adaptation. Species that had spent millions of years evolving specialized survival traits were learning that a human could develop similar abilities in just a few months of exposure to the right conditions. Then, Dr. Kilneth dropped the bombshell that changed everything. She had decided to investigate where these remarkable abilities came from, so she had requested detailed information about Earth, the human homeworld. What she found there made her question everything she thought she knew about planetary classification and species development. Earth, she announced to the stunned tribunal, was not the peaceful garden world that galactic records claimed it to be. According to her analysis, Earth was actually what the scientific community classified as a mild death world. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs as Dr. Kilneth began listing Earth's environmental hazards. The planet experienced regular, natural disasters that could wipe out entire civilizations. Earthquakes shook the ground without warning. Volcanoes erupted with enough force to change global weather patterns. Hurricanes and tornadoes ripped across the surface with devastating power. The weather itself was constantly trying to kill everything on the planet. Temperatures swung from freezing cold to blazing hot. Droughts could last for years, followed by floods that covered vast areas. Winter brought ice and snow that made survival nearly impossible without advanced preparation. But the real dangers came from Earth's wildlife. Dr. Kilneth's holographic displays showed creatures that made the tribunal members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Massive predators with jaws strong enough to crush bone. Venomous creatures that could kill with a single bite. Microscopic organisms that caused diseases capable of wiping out entire populations. Yet humans had not just survived on this hostile world. They had thrived. They had spread across every continent, adapted to every climate, and learned to live, alongside predators that would terrify most galactic species. Dr. Kilneth explained that humans had developed what she called biological redundancy. Their bodies had backup systems for almost everything. If one kidney failed, the other could handle the workload. If part of their liver was damaged, the rest could regenerate. If they lost blood, their bodies could quickly produce more. If they broke bones, the bones would heal back stronger than before. Their psychological resilience was even more impressive. Humans could endure stress levels that would drive most species insane. They could adapt to new situations quickly, learn from failure, and maintain hope even in seemingly hopeless circumstances. Most remarkably, humans seem to have an instinctive understanding of how to work with hostile environments rather than against them. They didn't just survive challenges, they found ways to turn those challenges into advantages. As Dr. Kilneth concluded her testimony, the tribunal sat in stunned silence. They were beginning to realize that they hadn't been judging a reckless human who had violated safety protocols. They had been judging a member of a species that was naturally equipped to do things that the rest of the galaxy considered impossible. The case was no longer about whether Kim Tae-ho had broken the law. It was about whether the galaxy needed to completely rethink what they thought they knew about survival, adaptation, and the remarkable species from the small blue planet they had dismissed as harmless newcomers. The tension in the tribunal chamber had been building for days as the judges deliberated behind closed doors. Representatives from hundreds of worlds waited anxiously in their floating seats, knowing that whatever decision came down would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. Some whispered that Kim Tae-ho would face exile to the Outer Rim territories. Others suggested he might be forced to undergo experimental procedures to understand his impossible abilities. No one expected what actually happened. Judge Kexthera's crystal body blazed with brilliant white light as she rose to announce the verdict. Her voice carried across the chamber with the authority of someone who had presided over galactic law for 3 centuries. The assembled aliens fell completely silent, hanging on every word. Kim Tae-ho was cleared of all charges. The announcement sent shockwaves through the courtroom, but Judge Kexthera wasn't finished. In a decision that stunned even the most experienced legal observers, the tribunal went further than simply dismissing the case. They formally recognized Kim Tae-ho as a survival specialist of unprecedented capability, a title that had never been granted to anyone in galactic history. But the real surprise was still coming. Judge Kexthera's light patterns shifted to deep blue as she announced the tribunal's supplementary ruling. After careful consideration of all the evidence presented, the galactic community was officially reclassifying Earth from Garden World status to something entirely new: training ground designation. The implications hit the assembled representatives like a thunderbolt. Garden worlds were considered peaceful, safe places where civilized beings could live comfortably. Training grounds were something else entirely. They were worlds where beings went to test themselves, to push their limits, to learn skills that couldn't be taught anywhere else. The tribunal was essentially announcing that Earth wasn't the quiet, harmless planet they had always believed it to be. It was a world that produced beings capable of surviving in conditions that would kill most galactic citizens. And now, for the first time in galactic history, the community wanted to learn from a species they had previously considered primitive. The formal invitation came next. Humans were being asked to establish the galaxy's first interspecies survival academy. The facility would be built on a neutral world, staffed by human instructors, and open to any species brave enough to learn what humans considered basic survival skills. As news of the decision spread across the galactic communication networks, the response was unlike anything in recorded history. Within hours of the announcement, the tribunal's communication systems were flooded with inquiries from species across civilized space. The Vraxian Empire, legendary for their warrior culture, immediately requested detailed information about human training methods. These were beings who had conquered dozens of worlds through pure military might, yet they wanted to learn from a species they had previously dismissed as soft and weak. The Althorian Confederacy, master builders who had constructed some of the galaxy's most impressive structures, sent formal requests for human expertise in working with hostile environments. They had always used advanced technology to overcome environmental challenges, but Kim Tae-ho had shown them that sometimes the old-fashioned approach was more effective. Even the mysterious Zephyrians, who rarely interacted with other species, broke their centuries of isolation to inquire about human adaptation techniques. These shape-changing beings had always considered themselves the ultimate survivors, but they had never encountered anyone who could actually befriend the creatures, trying to kill them. The most surprising response came from the Karathian military. Commander Hexmol himself submitted a formal application to attend the new academy, stating that his humiliating defeat on Kethvar Prime had taught him that his people's approach to hostile environments was fundamentally flawed. Kim Tae-ho stood in the center of the tribunal chamber, still looking remarkably calm despite having just become the most famous human in galactic history. When Judge Kexthera asked if he would accept the position of Director of Hostile Environment Training, he smiled and gave the same easy nod he had used throughout the entire trial. His acceptance speech was typically straightforward. He thanked the tribunal for their wisdom and expressed hope that sharing human survival techniques would help prevent unnecessary deaths on dangerous worlds. He talked about survival not as a matter of fighting against nature, but of learning to work with it. As Kim Tae-ho spoke, representatives throughout the chamber began to understand something that would reshape galactic civilization. Humans weren't just survivors, they were teachers. They had spent millions of years learning lessons on a world that had constantly tried to kill them, and now they were willing to share that knowledge with anyone brave enough to learn. The academies. First class would begin in 6 months, with enrollment limited to 100 students from across the galaxy. The waiting list filled up within days, with applications coming from military officers, exploration specialists, colonization experts, and even diplomatic personnel who wanted to understand how humans approached seemingly impossible challenges. Kim. Taeho's 8 months of what he called basic camping had done more than just revolutionize galactic law. It had given the universe a new understanding of what was possible when someone refused to accept that something couldn't be done. As he left the tribunal chamber, surrounded by reporters and officials all clamoring for interviews and statements, Kim Taeho looked exactly like what he had always been, an ordinary human who had simply done what humans do best. He had adapted, survived, and found a way to turn a deadly situation into an opportunity to help others. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The supposedly unremarkable species from the small blue planet had just become the teachers that everyone wanted to learn from.